Join the Coven. The Gargoyles were supposed to protect us, but now I know the truth. A story written by PyroGirl18. Windrip, Massachusetts has always been a peculiar town. You see, there's a legend here regarding the numerous marble gargoyles that watch over each home, business, church, and shack. As far as anyone knows, they've always been there, silently standing guard over those that call this place home. They are our guardian angels, our stony sentinels to ward off evil. Not only that, but Windrip has always been an incredibly blessed place. Nothing really terrible ever happened here. Crime was non-existent. No one fell upon financial hardships. Children were born healthy to vibrant mothers, and the elderly slipped away peacefully in the night. Now, though, I know what sinister secrets these marble monstrosities hold. My name is Spencer, and I've been a janitor for the past 5 years since I graduated from Windrip High. Not the most glamorous job I know, but it paid the bills and kept me and my girlfriend Anna in our cozy 2-bedroom apartment right in the heart of town. I subcontract for a cleaning company, and I still remember the day my fate was sealed. "Spencer, how you doing?" Jim asked cheerily as I entered the office that Wednesday evening to retrieve my paycheck. "Hey Jim, not bad. How about yourself?" I replied, eager to get the small talk out of the way and collect my earnings. I had plans to take Anna away for our 3-year anniversary next week, and had been saving all that I could. God, I wish we would have just gone on that trip. "Can't complain. Listen, kid, you're being reassigned," he informed me, leaning back in his chair. I frowned at the short, pudgy man behind the desk. "Reassigned? To where? Is there a problem? No one at the gym had said anything." I had been the regular cleaning crew at the local gym for over a year now, and was perplexed as to why I would be relocated. "No, it's not that. Quite the opposite, actually." He leaned forward now, a gleam in his eye. "You're being relocated to the church. They're real serious about their holy temple and only hire the best." My eyes widened as my wallet greedily egged me on at the first hint of a promotion. "And will it hold the same rate?" Jim laughed heartily before devolving into a fit of coughs. The many years of continued smoking had surely done a number on his lungs. "Right, to the chase, I see." "Good man. Of course, there will be a pay increase with this reassignment." I grinned at my boss brightly, nodding my head. "Of course, sir. Thank you." With that, Jim reached into the desk drawer at his side and withdrew a white envelope. He reached forward and handed me what I knew to be my regular paycheck. "You start first thing in the morning, 8 a.m. sharp, kid. Don't be late." I thanked him once more as I accepted the envelope from him. I made my way home, excited to tell Anna about my new promotion. As I walked down the streets, I grinned up at the looming figures perched upon the rooftops. I sent a silent prayer up to them, to thank them for the luck that had befallen me. On my way, I stopped at the florist and picked up a bouquet of orchids, Anna's favorite. I unlocked the front door and made my way to the kitchen, grinning as I presented Anna with the gift. "Spencer, "Wow, these are beautiful, thanks," she exclaimed, throwing her arms around my neck and planting her lips on my cheek. "What's the occasion?" I smiled at her, watching her hazel eyes widen as I shared the news. "I got a promotion." She returned my smile and bounced excitedly, her short chestnut locks swinging around her face. "Congrats, babe. We need to go celebrate." And celebrate we did. I took her to the nicest restaurant in town, the Windrip Inn. The promotion caused me to be less frugal and kept the drinks coming steadily throughout the night. When Anna and I finally stumbled home around 3 in the morning, it was all we could do to change and collapse into bed in our drunken stupor. That morning, when I awoke, it was to the angry buzzing of the alarm clock and the jackhammer splitting my skull right in two. With a pained groan, I slapped the device angrily and slinked out of bed. I didn't dare turn on the lights as I dressed, for fear of the pain I knew would inevitably come. Soon enough, I was in my car and driving across town to the church. I rolled into the parking lot with time to spare. The towering white cathedral before me always took my breath away, not just because of its sheer size, but because of the copious amount of stone gargoyles that stood watch along the roof's perimeter. I collected my basket of cleaning supplies from my trunk and trudged up the stairs, eager to escape the sun's harsh rays. Pushing open the sturdy mahogany doors, I tentatively entered the church. No one was around at this time of morning, for which I considered myself lucky, as the hangover laid waste to my poor, bruised brain. If only I hadn't been so careless, so hungover. Things might have ended differently. I started in on the cleaning, first sweeping and mopping the floors of the nave. While I waited for the floors to dry, I turned my attention to the back rooms. I was wary to intrude on this hallowed ground, as I had never set foot beyond the worship area. Regardless, it was my job, and so I pushed aside my trepidation and entered the hallway behind the podium. I entered the first room to my right, a restroom. I set to work scrubbing the tiles when an unexpected sound reached my ears. I turned around towards the door, my ears straining at the sound. No one was due to be here so early. But it was a public church after all. I stood and poked my head into the hallway, glancing left and right. "Hello?" I called. Receiving no response, I shrugged and went back to my task. It was an old building, bound to make the occasional creak or groan. I began cleaning the toilets, my least favorite portion of the job. I frowned and rose to my feet once more, marching out into the hallway. "Is someone there?" I called. I jumped in surprise at the loud sound that echoed down the hallway from the nave. With a huff, I strode down the hall and back out into the main area. I searched the cavernous room for any sign of another presence, turning up empty. After finding no indication that I was not alone, I returned to the bathroom to finish. I retrieved the glass cleaner and clean rag from my basket of supplies and began cleaning the mirror above a sink. In the reflection as I wiped away the cleaner, I could see the open door leading to the hallway behind me. As I wiped the last of the cleaner from the now sparkling mirror, I saw a dark figure dart past the entrance to the room. I cursed under my breath as I dropped the bottle of cleaner from my hands, startled by the presence I had seen. I whirled around and raced out of the bathroom, searching for the figure I had seen. I turned to my right and saw the shadow turn the corner at the end of the hall, farther into the church. It moved so quickly, I could almost convince myself my eyes were playing tricks on me. The slamming of a door further down assured me that what I had seen was real. I tentatively inched down the hall, peeking around every corner for any sight of who had encroached upon this revered place. One door at the very end of the hall was closed, while the rest stood open. Haltingly, I made my way down the hall, sparing a quick glance into each of the rooms I passed. At the end of the hall, I gingerly opened the door, hesitant to intrude on this holy space, but was taken aback by the sight before me. The room was teeming with stone gargoyles, cloistered so closely together, I could barely see the path winding through them. Their unnerving visages were twisted into grim snarls as if offended by my presence among them. The air in the room felt heavy, and a chill raced down my spine as I stood frozen in the door, as if I too were a statue among them. Dozens of pairs of marble eyes stared directly at me, as if they could see through me, straight into my soul. I stood there, mesmerized and terrified by these stone monstrosities, all sights and sounds other than the sentinels before me fleeing the room as if they had been sucked out. The rapid beating of my heart was the only sound I could hear, its crescendo heightening with each second that passed until finally I was able to break free from whatever spell had transfixed me to the statues. I took a shaky breath and scrubbed a hand over my face, taking the room once more as I searched for whatever presence I had seen in the hall. The gargoyles were all coated in a thick shroud of dust, and I could already feel the tingle in my nose as my allergies reared their ugly head. From my current position, I had no hope of seeing the entirety of the room, filled as it was with large statues. With a groan, I carefully sidestepped my way through the room, grumbling under my breath as I did my best to avoid coming into contact with the ghoulish sculptures. Of course, even my best efforts were not enough. As I wove my way between the gargoyles, twisting my body in unnatural ways to bend around through the statues, I could feel my balance begin to falter. I scarcely had time to thrust my hands forward to break my fall. In my downward spiral, I felt my foot catch on the corner of a gargoyle. I yelped as I hit the floor, the statue crashing down on top of me. I groaned and squeezed my eyes shut, my head reeling from the pain of the fall. With a grunt, I shoved the cracked pieces of marble off of me, rolling onto my side and pushing myself to my knees. I was brushing the marble dust from my t-shirt when the first shrill cry reached my ears. My head whipped around as I searched for the source of the sound. As the sound of a crying baby intensified in the small room, I slowly glanced down at the shattered stone gargoyle by my side. The sound appeared to be coming from inside what was left of the statue's head. I hastily lifted the cracked marble, a startled gasp escaping my lips as I stared down at an infant crying weakly on the floor. Part 2. What the hell? I muttered to myself as I stripped off my zip-up hoodie and wrapped the naked child in it, murmuring what I thought were soothing words. to it as my mind raced a mile a minute. Not knowing what else to do and fearing someone may show up, I placed the now sleeping infant on a pew and hastily cleaned up the remnants of my clumsiness. I gingerly retrieved the baby and fled to my car, sitting in the parking lot and gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white as I considered what I should do. I should go to the police, I reasoned. Surely they would know what to do. But it's injured. I should go to the hospital, I thought. No, stupid. If you show up with an injured baby with no explanation for where it came from, your butt is going straight to the slammer. I groaned internally, warring with myself over the next course of action. Go home. Wait for Anna. She'll know what to do. I let out a shaky breath, and with a glance at the baby in the back seat, turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered and coughed, but refused to start. No, not now, I muttered to myself, turning the key once, twice, 3 more times before the engine roared to life. With a silent thank you to the heavens, I drove down the familiar streets as quickly as possible without calling attention to myself. When Anna walked through the front door a few hours later, I was standing in the kitchen rocking a screaming baby. I had been trying to calm her for over an hour. My head was in even more agony, and I was at a loss for how to soothe the infant. I looked at Anna with relief on my face, hoping she would know what to do. Instead, she stood in the doorway with her jacket half on, staring at me with her jaw dropped. Spencer? She began haltingly. Why do you have a baby? Anna, you're never going to believe this, but I swear to you it's the truth, I told her earnestly, nearly shouting over the infant's high-pitched wails. I quickly relayed the events of the day to her. She sat at the kitchen island, elbows resting on the counter and her fingers forming a triangle against her chin. You're telling me you knocked over a statue and a human baby came out? She inquired disbelievingly. I nodded vigorously. Yes, please, Anna, it won't stop crying and I don't know what the hell to do with it. Anna gave an exasperated sigh and stood from her seat, crossing the kitchen to me and lifting the baby out of my arms. She rocked her gently and cooed to it, her voice slowly soothing the crying child to sleep. Finally, having a moment of silence, I slid into the now vacant seat at the counter. Anna, what the hell do we even do with the baby? If we go to the cops or the hospital, they're gonna ask where it came from. How do I explain that? She frowned at me. Was this the only one? She asked. I don't know, maybe the church has some shady stuff going on. If there's other kids, maybe it's some sort of human trafficking deal. I pondered her words. I'd been too startled to check the other statues, but she made a valid point. If there were others, it would free me from any guilt. I'm due back in the morning. I can check then. I'll take Leon with me, get another set of eyes on it for confirmation, I reasoned, knowing my longtime friend would back me up. But what do we do about the baby tonight? She asked. I'll run out and grab some formula or something quick, and we'll just, I don't know, make it a nest on the floor? I was completely lost on how to care for a human baby, but figured between the two of us, we could make it to morning. I ran to the local convenience store and bought the formula. When I arrived back at the apartment, Anna and I took turns trying to feed the baby, but it wouldn't accept any of the sustenance and only seemed to grow more agitated as we continued to try. Finally, we gave up and decided to just let it sleep. We set up a small cocoon of pillows and blankets on the floor next to our bed and delicately placed the baby in the center. Exhausted, Anna and I collapsed into the bed and were asleep in no time at all. It may have been a dream, but at one point during the night, I was roused from my slumber by a sound. A soft creaking, grinding noises permeated the otherwise silent bedroom in the dark, and from the floor, I could swear I saw 2 glowing red eyes. The next morning, I awoke before Anna and the baby. I quietly slipped out of bed, snatched my clothes from the chair, and snuck out the bedroom door, taking care not to disturb them. As I made myself a quick breakfast, I shot a text to my best friend Leon. "Hey man, you up? I need a favor." His response came before I had even set the phone back down. "Yeah man, what do you need?" I frowned down at the cell phone in my hand, unsure how to explain it in a way that he wouldn't immediately think I was insane and turn me into the cops. "Meet me at the church in 30 minutes. I headed out to my car, sliding into the driver's seat quickly and starting the car. Just like yesterday, the engine groaned and shook, but wouldn't start. "Damn it, really?" I muttered to myself, furiously turning the key over and over in the ignition to no avail. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I said, addressing the inanimate vehicle as I pounded a fist against the dashboard. Finally giving up, I exited the car with a vicious slam of the door. I zippered my jacket and shoved my hands in the pockets, grumbling under my breath as I trudged down the road, resigned to the long walk to the church. As I walked down the streets, deserted so early in the morning when the sun had barely peeked its head above the horizon, my eyes were drawn to the imposing stone gargoyles that lined the roofs. No longer did I feel protected by the immobile guardians. Now, as I walked the street, I felt vulnerable, exposed, as if every gargoyle lining the roofs was watching me and waiting to pounce. My heart hammering in my chest, I quickened my pace, eager to escape the all-seeing eyes of the gargoyles. I passed the flower shop I had visited last night, frowning as I noticed some sort of commotion from inside. I paused a moment before heading inside. "Mr. Brenner, everything all right?" I asked as I entered, freezing as I took in the sight before me. All the flowers in the shop, even those stored in coolers, were wilted, rotting messes. A haggard Mr. Brenner was studiously clearing out all the waste, his face distraught. "Spencer, hello. I'm sorry, I don't have anything to sell today. I'm not sure how this happened. Refrigeration unit must have gone or something," he said, tossing what had once been a beautiful rose table decoration in the waste bin. "I'm so sorry to hear that. I need to get to work, but I'll stop by later if you need a hand," I told him. My parents have been good friends with him, and it would have felt wrong to leave the elderly man to clear out the entire shop himself. "Thank you, son. Get to work. I can handle things here," he said with a smile. I exited the shop once more and resumed my early morning trek to the church. I kept my eyes cast downward, not wanting to see the looming figures perched high above the street. When I arrived at the church, I saw Leon's SUV parked alone in the lot. As I approached, my friend exited his car, a green knit cap pulled over his short brown hair and a grin on his face. He handed me a to-go cup of coffee and shoved his free hand in the pocket of his gray sweatshirt as he sipped his own. "So, what's going on?" he asked, cutting right to the chase. Leon had never been one to beat around the bush or mince words, and I was grateful for that now. I took a deep breath before delving into the tale, explaining the figure I had seen running through the hallways at the back of the church, the room filled with grotesque statues, and finally, the baby. I could tell by the look on his face that he was skeptical. Let's be real. He was probably considering if he had time to call the cops before I came at him like some deranged animal. "Well, let's see. Take a look then," Leon said, giving me the benefit of the doubt. I nodded and led the way forward, ascending the concrete steps to the sturdy double doors. I pulled my keys out of my pocket to unlock the door, dropping the ring from my shaking hands. Cursing under my breath, I stooped down and retrieved the keys, fumbling through them once more before finding the one I needed. I shoved it into the keyhole and turned it. A hollow click resounded as the doors unlocked. Shoving the keys back in my pocket, Leon and I made our way down the aisle between the pews. I glanced around the empty, cavernous nave nervously, waiting for some unseen evil to spring out and eat us whole. We were silent as we entered the back hallway and approached the last door. So, they were in there? Leon asked uncertainly. I nodded, swallowing past the lump in my throat, as I stepped forward and pushed the door open, bracing myself for what I knew we would find in there. Except the room was empty. I stared in disbelief, not believing my eyes. Leon, I swear they were here. I rushed forward into the room, scouring every nook and cranny for some sign that what I saw had been real. A breath of relief escaped me as I took in the floor. Dozens upon dozens of round imprints in the thick layer of dust on the floor assured me that the statues had, in fact, been here. Leon crouched down and swiped his finger through one of the rings, smudging the dust into a spotless portion of the hardwood floor. So, someone moved them all out? I frowned, looking around once more. But where and why? I gasped, spinning around to face my friend and shoving my hand through my dark hair in distress. You don't think they know, do you, that I broke one? Leon shrugged, standing up and crossing his arms over his chest. It's possible, but wouldn't they have come for the baby if they did? Maybe they don't know it's you. Just that someone messed stuff up, he reasoned. I nodded, agreeing with his train of thought. You're probably right, which means we need to get out of here before they realize it was me. Leon nodded, halting me as we exited the room with a hand on my shoulder. You do realize what this likely means, right? I frowned, turning around to face him. What do you mean? Leon's face was grim and his tone somber as he spoke. It means the church is involved in something shady they don't want anyone to find out about. The baby, everything being moved when you came back, means they knew someone had seen what they were doing and are trying to cover it up. I clenched my trembling hands into fists, pushing aside the unease that was building inside of me. So, what do we do about it? Our proof is gone. No one will ever believe this. And if we tell anyone without proof, the church will know exactly who we are. Leon nodded, walking forward with me once more. We need to find where they moved everything. As we turned the corner, I briefly caught sight of a dark figure exiting towards the nave, just like yesterday. Leon, did you see that? His eyes wide in surprise, he nodded, sprinting down the hall with me. A faint sound, almost like the flapping of wings, echoed through the nave. We ran into the expansive room, shocked to find it empty. They gotta be hiding somewhere. Let's be careful, Leon said. I gaped at him, whispering back, Leon, are you insane? We need to get the hell out of here. My words fell on deaf ears as Leon was already sneaking forward, peeking under pews. I hastily checked the confessional and any other potential hiding spots, coming up empty. As I met Leon back in the aisle between the pews, the sound of giggling bounced off the arching ceilings and floated down to us. We both froze, the dread inside me built with the pounding of my heart as we slowly glanced upwards. Dozens of monstrous gargoyles sat perched above the nave, their stony expression sneering down at us. We stood immobile, not even daring to take a breath. Another giggle through the church, and then another, until a cacophony of cackles resounded in through the room. Leon turned to me, his expression panicked. "Spencer, what is happening?" I shook my head at a loss for words. "Come on, man, let's just leave," I whispered pleadingly. He nodded, and together we tentatively headed towards the door. When we were only a few paces from the door, the taunting laughter changed. The voices in the room changed to the high-pitched wails of 100 babes, all shrieking in tandem. I slapped my hands over my ears to block out the piercing screams. I glanced at Leon to see his face twisted in a similar expression of agony, his hands clasped to his head. "Leon!" I shouted over the din, jerking my head towards the back of the church. Together we raced down the aisle and into the back hallway. The wails slowly began to quiet the further we got from the door, until it was once again eerily quiet. The silence was almost as painful as the shrieks. It was as if the something were waiting to see what our next move would be. "What do we do now?" Leon finally asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. I shook my head. I didn't have an answer for him. Haltingly, I meandered down the hall, peeking into the rooms for any sign of a presence. One door stood closed, this time not the room that held the gargoyles, but a room I remembered from my snooping yesterday to be an office. Leon's eyes met mine, and we nodded a silent agreement. He approached the door and turned the knob, but it wouldn't open. "It feels like something's wedged behind the door," he said, ramming his shoulder into the door in an attempt to force the object loose. On the third try, the door swung open and Leon crashed into the room. I muttered a curse and rushed into the room to see Leon in a heap of limbs and shattered marble on the floor. The gargoyle statue must have been placed behind the door, and forcing it open had sent it tumbling to the ground. Leon groaned from the ground, and I extended a hand to pull him to his feet. "Thanks, man," he said, brushing off his sweatshirt. That's when the too familiar sound of a baby's cries rose from the pile of broken marble on the floor. "You've got to be kidding me," Leon muttered before kneeling down and delicately scrounging through the rubble. A moment later, he lifted a small, naked baby from the floor, holding it outstretched from his body as if it might bite him. "Spence, what do we do with a baby?" he exclaimed, and I couldn't help but let out a nervous laugh. "Now you see why I brought you here," I replied. He tentatively brought the wailing baby closer, resting it against his shoulder and awkwardly bouncing in an attempt to quiet its cries. "Damn, man, we need to go to the cops," Leon began. He opened his mouth to continue, but the words never left his lips. I saw a familiar flash of gleaming red eyes as the baby reared its head back, its mouth stretching far too wide for a child, and its teeth far too sharp as it lunged forward and sank its fangs into my best friend's throat. It sucked greedily, grotesque snarls emanating from the creature before it yanked its head back once more, tearing a chunk of flesh from Leon's neck. I screamed, terror and shock crashing over me in waves that battled for dominance of my emotions. I stumbled backwards out of the room, hearing the thud of Leon hitting the floor and his dying gurgles. The abomination hunched over Leon, reveling in its feast. As I watched, too stunned and aghast to move, the skin of the baby's back began to ripple and churn. Suddenly, in a burst of blood and sinew, two enormous webbed stone-like wings erupted from just below its shoulder blades. My hammering heart finally spurred me into action, the flight response overtaking me. I began to run toward the nave, but the shrieking howls picked back up the closer I got. I skidded around and raced back down the hall, seeing the open door of the empty room that had housed the gargoyles before me. With only a moment of hesitation, I picked up speed, braced my arms in front of my face, and vaulted out the window in a shower of glass. Tucking my legs and rolling down the hill behind the church. Part 3. The final chapter. Sometime later, my heavy eyelids warily fluttered open. I squinted in the darkness, trying to get my bearings. As I slowly sat up, a piercing pain knifed through my tender scalp, and I reached a shaking hand up to my head, feeling a sticky wetness along my hairline. I rubbed and blinked my eyes a few more times, trying to adjust to the murky gloom surrounding me. A blood-coated rock where I had been lying indicated I must have hit my head as I tumbled down the hill, causing me to lose consciousness. I had no idea how long I'd been lying here, unconscious, but if the veil of nightfall promised, it was longer than I had hoped. With a groan, I slowly rose to my feet. My jeans and hoodie were soaked from lying in the wet leaves, and a chill was quickly settling into my bones. My teeth chattered, and I hugged my arms around myself for warmth, begrudgingly trudging back up the hill towards the church. My head swimming, I tried to wade through my muddled thoughts for my next course of action. Should I call the police, see a doctor, flee town? I ruminated on these ideas as I approached the church. Despite the shattered window and the shards of glass covering the lawn, the cathedral appeared deserted. No lights were on, and the parking lot was empty. Leon. I scrubbed a hand over my face as the memory of my best friend's demise resurfaced. I shuddered, bile rising in my throat as I envisioned the tiny monster devouring him. I glanced nervously at the broken window in front of me, finally making up my mind. With a huff, I lifted my aching, bruised body up over the sill, landing unceremoniously in a heap on the floor. My body tense and my heart hammering in my chest, I waited, my ears straining to hear any indication that I may not be alone. When the silence went undisturbed, I let out a soft breath of relief and made my way down the hall to the office where I had last seen Leon in. I steeled myself for the gruesome sight I was sure I would see, even though I was still holding out hope that my friend had survived and was waiting for help. I pushed the door open gently, the well-oiled hinges barely making a sound as it swung open. I stepped inside, not daring to turn the lights on, using only the faint glow of moonlight through the arching windows to guide my search. "Leon, are you there?" I whispered, checking each corner and closet for any sign of my friend. But he was gone. Only a dark stain on the aged hardwood floor indicated Leon's demise had in fact been real. I froze as the faint sound from the hallway drifted to my ears. Beads of sweat dotted my forehead, the salt stinging the tiny scrapes and cuts along my face from the glass and my subsequent fall. My heart thudded in my chest, my breath quickening. I fought for control, fearing whatever presence was approaching would hear the terrified hammering of my heart and close in on me. After hearing no further sounds, I tentatively snuck out into the hall, creeping slowly around the corner. I stifled a shocked gasp as I glanced down the hallway. There, at the end of the hall near the entrance to the nave, stood one lone stone gargoyle. I held my breath, locked in a doomed staring contest with the sinister statue. The silence stretched on and the monstrosity loomed threateningly before me. My body trembled as I waited for the grotesque gargoyle to make its move. The soft giggle of a child floated down the hallway, bouncing off the walls to reach my ears. Finally, startled from the reticent battle with the gargoyle, I rallied whatever courage I could muster and set forth down the hall once more. I carefully sidestepped around the gargoyle, my eyes glued to the statue the entire time. Even as I backed down through the doorway into the nave, my eyes stayed fixed to it until the statue was no longer in sight. I turned around and stopped dead in my tracks as the icy tendrils of fear snaked their way around my heart, clenching it in its glacial grasp. Surrounding the doorway like a pack of hungry wolves stood a legion of gargoyles, their expressions twisted in sinister snarls and vile visages. A mischievous giggle in my ear caused me to spin around, seeing the gargoyle from the hall had inexplicably moved closer, caging me in the ring of statues. I swore under my breath as I tried to figure out a way out of this predicament. The gargoyles were tightly packed together. I wouldn't be able to escape without picking up and moving them. And heavy as they were, that seemed like an impossibility. Another giggle sounded behind me once more, followed by another, and another. The din rose, echoing off the vaulted ceilings of the cathedral and reverberating back down to me. The playful giggles turned to wicked cackles, and then finally to piercing shrieks. I dropped to my knees in the center of a mass of stone, clamping my hands over my agonized ears as the blood-curdling screams raked through my head. My own screams joined theirs as blood trickled from my ears down to my wrists. The malevolent marble monster sneered down at me as if basking in my torment. When I could finally take it no more, I stumbled back to my feet with rivulets of blood streaming down the sides of my face and a roar ripping itself from my chest. I placed my hands against the first gargoyle in front of me and shoved with all my strength. Instantly, the uncanny screams cut off and the room went chillingly silent. As if in slow motion, I watched the gargoyle teeter backwards, a grim look of glee twisting its ghastly features as it crashed into the statue behind it. To my horror, the next statue toppled, and then the next, and then the next, the domino effect rippling outwards in a radius of destruction. When the dust finally cleared, I gazed out into a sea of smashed marble gargoyles. The foreboding stillness stretched on, and I didn't bother waiting for the cries I knew were coming. As I cautiously stepped my way through the rubble, careful to maintain my balance, the wailing of countless infants began from beneath the debris. "Oh God," I mumbled, hurrying my pace. The towering double doors lay only a few precious feet away, and I grew careless, opting for speed rather than safety. In the dark, it was that much harder to see where I was stepping. A poorly placed foot almost set me off my balance and tumbling into the source of the cries. My ankle exploded in a burst of pain as I felt a set of needle-like teeth embed themselves in the tender flesh. I screamed, stomping my ankle to dislodge the tiny creature from my skin to no avail. Blood ran down my leg and drenched my sock as the monstrous baby feasted. My panic threatened to overwhelm me, and I struggled to keep my wits about me. I grabbed a hefty chunk of marble and raised it high above my head, sparing not even a moment's hesitation as I brought the stone down upon the beast's skull, over and over. Finally, I felt its jaw slacken and I was free. I tossed aside the makeshift weapon, swiping my blood-covered hands over the front of my sweatshirt as I stumbled out of the wreckage of the gargoyles and into the frigid night air. The wails echoed out into the night behind me as I limped away from the hellhole that was the church. With shaking hands, I pulled out my cell phone, my fingers slicing open on the glass screen that had shattered in my fall from the window. I tried to call Anna 12 times, if not more, but there was no answer. Panic mounting, I limped as fast as I was able down the streets, wincing with each step. As I walked, I glanced up and gasped. All the rooftops that had been guarded by the stone sentinels for as long as the town had stood lie vacant now. It was far more eerie to see them empty than to see the gargoyles looming over the town. And a knot was forming in the pit of my stomach as I stumbled down the road. Finally, reaching my apartment, I fumbled with my keys, but as I went to slide it into the lock, I realized it had been pointless. The door was cracked open, a small sliver of light from inside spilling into the hall. "Anna?" I called tentatively, nudging the door open wider. I closed the door quietly behind me, stepping into the room as my eyes darted around for any sign of her. "Anna, where are you?" I called again as I approached the closed bedroom door. Faint growls reached my ears. No, Anna!" I cried as I darted forward, swinging the door open with a bang. A choked sob escaped me as I took in Anna, lying immobile on the floor. Her once vibrant cobalt eyes were now pale and cloudy. A look of terror forever frozen on her beautiful face. I sank to the ground beside her, cradling her limp body in my arms. She was covered in sticky blood, some of it already beginning to dry. Her throat was in shreds, as well as her arm and torso, where the abomination has feasted upon her. I sobbed brokenly, rocking on the floor and murmuring promises to whatever God may deem me worthy of mercy from this torment and spare her life, even though it was already forfeit. A scuffling noise from across the dark room caught my attention, and my head jerked up as my senses went into high alert. I gently set Anna back down and rose to my feet, slowly backing towards the light from the doorway that partially illuminated the bedroom. A small, dark shadow darted from the corner underneath the bed, growls emanating from the pitch darkness where the light couldn't reach. Suddenly, the shadow sped forward, leaping out from under the bed at me. Its small body was propelled inexplicably by stone bat-like wings. A mouth lined with razor-sharp teeth opened as it rushed towards me, and I saw what looked like marble horns spiking out from its forehead. I threw my arm up to shield myself, and the creature latched onto the skin of my forearm, teeth snapping shut around my flesh and clawed fingers digging into arm. I screamed as I stumbled backwards into the living room, flailing my arm around to try and dislodge the monster to no avail. I slammed my arm against the wall, and then again, finally knocking it loose. But not before it ripped a chunk of flesh from my arm. I flung my arm and sent the infant spiraling across the room, splashes of blood spattering across the walls and floor. I stumbled into the bedroom, slamming the door shut behind me and locking it. I don't think I have long now. Already my vision grows hazy from the loss of blood my injuries have caused. I tried to staunch the flow of blood with towels, t-shirts, anything. Each one now lay scattered across the floor, soaked in blood. I can hear screams rising from the streets below as the gargoyle infants feast on anything they can get their hands on. I would ask for anyone to send help, but I can already hear the one that dealt me the mortal injuries gnawing through the bedroom door.